Misha, hi. Thanks for coming.
We are always here.
By the way, your glasses are cool. I don't remember seeing you in these glasses. You rarely wear glasses. No.
No, I rarely wear these glasses. I usually have different ones, but I've had these for a while now, about a year.
I'm looking out the window. The weather's nice. Everything's green. It's summer. Awesome.
Yeah, it is.
So tell me, how did you like all of this? Everyone was saying there wouldn't be a war, that they'd come to an agreement, that damn America wouldn't get involved in Iran, and Israel wouldn't either. And now we're seeing a full-blown war break out. And it's a pretty serious war too. Like that missile that came from Iraq. Quite a few people died. Well, not a huge number, but enough, and buildings were destroyed. And of course, Israel is just hammering Iran to the fullest. So what happened? Seriously, what actually happened? Let's put it this way. If you could answer with just one question, who needed this the most? And what will Netanyahu put first? Israel's security or his own personal goals? What's going on over there?
Let's break it down, yeah. First, we need to answer the question, who lost the most in all this? The biggest loser here, the one who lost the most, was Trump. As strange as that may sound, let me explain why. Look, Trump was promised. Well, he said 4 trillion, but in reality, it was 1.2, maybe 1.5 trillion. And you realize now he's not going to get that money. Because the Arab countries are furious. On top of that, Netanyahu and his allies are twisting Trump's arm, trying to force him to get directly involved in a war with Iran. That's the last thing Trump wants. Trump is fighting back and has almost managed to fend them off. But the whole situation looks extremely unpleasant. On another front, the operation to change the regime in Iran has failed. At first, on the first day, it seemed like everything was going according to plan. There was no government in Iran from the moment of the strike, but around 5:30 p.m. on the 13th, the Iranian authorities reappeared. Sorry, Steve, but what Israel is doing right now, blowing up empty military bases, blowing up an oil depot in Tehran. That's not a military target. They're blowing up empty barracks. That's a very questionable achievement. Honestly, I'm getting more and more of a sense that Israel doesn't know what to do. At the same time, we don't know what the consequences will be from today's Iranian strike on Israel, because yesterday's strike was very powerful.
Yeah.
Moreover, yesterday, according to various experts, about half of the missiles broke through the air defense system. At least, based on the footage we saw. So, the most important thing. The plan that was in place was stopped by someone. It's absolutely clear that this plan was not Israel's. Precisely because it was stopped by someone and wasn't carried through to the end. And I think it was London, and it's the same plan that was used against Russia, by the way, which was also stopped. But in Russia, it didn't work out even 50%, more like 25%. I'll say it again, it was stopped. My opinion was, and I've said this here with you before, that it was connected to the fact that in London they realized this happened there, the attack on Russia's strategic aviation airfields happened 2 days after the meeting between Pavel and Trump at the White House, about which nothing is still known. Knowing the specifics of the United States, We can assume that very confidential issues were discussed there, in particular, who should be appointed as the new Lehman Brothers after the crisis. If they realized this in London, well, then they had to make some decisions there. So they made some decisions and stopped this operation. Why did they stop the operation against Iran? And why did they let Iran, so to speak, recover? And I don't know who is in charge there now, but the fact that someone is in charge and that this someone has taken control of the country is obvious. By the way, one very important remark. When you blow up the sewage system in a big city, like they did in Tehran, you can't exactly make the locals love you more by doing that. So Netanyahu's statement that, guys, we're not against you, just get rid of, well, the Ayatollah regime, maybe you would even find some followers that way, but why blow up the sewage system? Well, there are a whole bunch of other nuances too. I'm not much of an expert in military operations or organizing coups, but the people here who actually understand these things say that Israel's actions over the past day and a half have been, let's say, not the most effective and not the most successful, not to mention that the damage already done to Israel and the damage that is still to come could turn out to be very significant. By the way, there's another effect here that everyone is forgetting about today, but which could very well come to the surface. Hamas and Hezbollah. They could very well come out into the open. I don't know if they have drones, but in these tough times, I can assure you, someone will supply them with drones. And since I've said many times that London's goal is to ignite a major war in the Middle East and, as a result of that war, eliminate Israel, I'm getting more and more of a sense that the operation that was launched against Iran, and which, apparently, was planned by London, was also botched by London itself. Precisely because what's needed is a big war, not a straightforward victory for Israel. And again, this hypothesis is that Netanyahu in this situation is acting as an agent of London. I have no doubt that he was used without his knowledge, but his recent statements, especially his address to the United States of America, don't look very good. Let's note that I believe if Trump didn't immediately give in to this appeal, that is, if he didn't launch an attack on Iran right away, then, most likely, the chances of that happening are only decreasing over time. Let's point out one more thing. Trump said that he spoke with Putin and asked Putin to act as a mediator. I translate into Russian. That means that neither side is going to win. Taking into account all the problems that Israel is facing, and the problems are very strong, because I think that Iran has already counter-confused a significant part of the industrial infrastructure. I think it is already counter-confused. I flatly, and with indignation, reject Israel's own statements that everything is fine, nothing happened, it's all business as usual, because I understand very well that, in this case, it's just state propaganda at work. But I think there will be a lot of problems. And, well, lastly, Iran's nuclear program has not been destroyed. And there's an opinion, again, I can't say for sure that Iran might conduct nuclear tests in the coming days. If that happens, it will be doubly terrifying for Israel. Besides that, there's another factor. Since they did manage to hit one reactor in Iran, from the Eastern perspective, Iran is expected to strike the reactor in Dimona, in the Negev Desert. I don't know if they've already struck it. I don't know what came of it, but they do. And plenty of others know too, since Russia, China, and the US all have satellite images. Of course, they're not going to show those images, at least not for now. Yes, one more thing that happened is Pakistan's statement that anyone who intervenes in this conflict on Israel's side will be hit with nuclear weapons. And it's absolutely obvious that this isn't a Pakistani response, but a Chinese one.
Okay.
In other words, if the goal was to start a war in the Middle East, then yes, London has
Installed.
accomplished it. Trump, by the way, also got what he wanted because he needed to raise the price of oil to about $75 or $80 so that production would become profitable. Let's also note that one of Iran's main trump cards, blocking the Strait of Hormuz, hasn't been used yet. Theoretically, it could. So, for this reason, as I wrap up my long-winded thoughts, I can say the following. As usual, things didn't go the way everyone expected. Everyone, including Washington, London, and Tel Aviv. I can't say anything about Moscow. I have a hypothesis that there are people in Moscow who considered this scenario from the very beginning. But it can be said with confidence that there will be a major reshaping of the Middle East. I don't think that as a result of this reshaping, many of the forces that wanted to be in charge there will actually stay in power. So we'll just have to wait and see. I think everything will be decided in the next 2 or 3 days.
So, Mikhail Yankovich, Operation Web, which was carried out by the Ukrainians and the Russian Federation, and what Mossad did, is it clear that it was done by the same hand?
Yes, it was done by the same hand, and that hand is British. So the accusation that Mossad was directing the Ukrainians is a lie. The British planned it in both cases.
Mikhail Grazianovich, what about the elimination of the top generals who were killed, 6 or 7 people, and the scientists who were killed at home, in their apartments, in Iran? First, doesn't that look like a terrorist act? Second, did Iran really not understand that this was happening? People like that aren't left overnight in their apartments, and we really need to understand why they were even there. What happened?
Steve, well, first of all, this is definitely a terrorist act. But there are ironclad rules. The victors are not judged.
Mother.
I think the plan was not only to take down Iran's military leadership, but also its political leadership. I'd like to point out, by the way, that the Rabbar Ayatollah Khamenei hasn't appeared in public since the 13th. He was shown, but it's unclear when that footage was recorded. Moving on. If that had happened, the next step would have been to organize a coup at the top. And then those people would have had to surrender, their own party of peace. I want to point out that Iran was really set up in a very typical way. We're negotiating with you, and you're implicitly assuming, even though no one promised this, that as long as talks are ongoing, there won't be a strike. I'd like to note the same thing happened in Russia.
Brother,
I strongly suspect that as a result, even a significant part of the so-called Party of Peace in Russia came to fully understand that no agreements with the West are possible. That's it. At least, not until there is a complete victory. That's what they realized, right? Of course, there are still some who want it anyway. And for them, the main thing is to have the sanctions lifted from them personally. But most of them realized that as a result of these negotiations, there would have been a blow, which would have led to Russia being dismembered, and all their assets and opportunities would have been eliminated. So, basically, the situation is absolutely clear-cut. They finally understood that. I think in Iran, they understood it too. As I already mentioned, at 1730 on the 13th, power appeared in Iran. And most likely, it's not Khomeini, it's someone else. Who it is, I can't even imagine. First of all, I have absolutely no idea how Iran is organized from the inside. Secondly, I don't understand how their system of governance works, or who it could even be in principle. But the fact that for the last 2 days there has been power there, we can see that with the naked eye. And it's a situation that's being managed quite well. Next. Third, Iran is an Eastern country. An Eastern country is characterized by the fact that everyone just sits around because, as much as possible, all decisions are postponed until tomorrow.
brother,
Mañana, right? To use a more familiar Latin American term. So, their mañana attitude led to the fact that everyone was at home in their warm beds.
very strange, very strange.
Since Israel didn't win, that means the attack is once again considered a terrorist act. And in this situation, it will be extremely difficult for Israel. They're already starting to shout that Iran is hitting children's cribs. Now, accordingly, they're going to show photos of children who died in hospitals in the Gaza Strip because Israel simply cut off the electricity there, and the children died in their hospital beds. That's it. And now, accordingly, Israel won't be able to dodge responsibility for this. But it's a well-known fact that when you strike first, if the blow isn't fatal to your opponent, it becomes extremely dangerous for you. So this is already Israel's mistake, right? They miscalculated something. However, if we follow the logic I've been laying out long before these events, it means that Israel put too much trust in London. Or, alternatively, Netanyahu is a traitor who is carrying out London's plan aimed at eliminating Israel itself. What other options are there? But we'll see each other there in 6 months, right?
Mikhail Khazin, last night Israeli planes were in Iranian airspace for 2 hours. And the Iranians confirmed it, and the Amr and the Israelis confirmed it too. Where was the Iranian air defense? Where are the allies? Where is Russia? Where is China? Israeli planes were basically flying freely in Iranian airspace, and not a single plane was shot down.
You know, I don't know whether any were shot down or not. The Iranians did announce that they shot something down. I heard that they were actually quite effective outside of Tehran. In Tehran, the air defense system really did seem to be disabled, but that was the result of sabotage. And accordingly, yeah, this isn't a war, it's sabotage. Well, of course, sabotage is part of war. But you have to understand, since they did all of this, they can't really say anything in response to the question. Israel can't say right now that an Iranian missile hit a residential building, because then they'll immediately get the response, well, your missiles also hit a residential building. They say, we were definitely targeting scientists, and we were also targeting scientists. So go ahead, prove that there wasn't one of your scientists in that residential complex. You see what I mean? So basically, how should I put it? We're already moving into the realm of political and military demagoguery.
I just don't understand how Mossad agents could have been working for 6 months at night, setting up rocket launchers. Iran didn't even notice it, even though they still want to prepare for this war with Israel. They weren't even preparing for anything at all.
Listen, this is a completely typical story in a country where a significant part of the population can't stand the regime. And the Ayatollahs have gotten on everyone's nerves with their ideological nonsense, right? The ladies want to wear mini skirts.
Just like it was under the Shah.
Well, that's exactly what they did. They wore mini skirts under the Shah. We have plenty of examples of countries where society stood against their own state. The most recent example we saw was in the USSR at the end of the 80s, right? Everyone read Ogoniak.
Yeah, that's true.
Of course, there were people who shouted, "What are you doing? You're destroying the country." They were told, well, this country needs to be destroyed. In hindsight, yes, all those liberals. Well, I can say, I saw those intellectuals who were trying to bring down the USSR. There was the club, the Moscow Scientists Club, and so on and so forth. They were really funny people. When I went there a couple of times, the first time I went, then I went again just to see that they weren't capable of saying anything meaningful. And after that, I never went there again. But they ended up destroying their own niche, the very place they lived in, with their own hands, right? Yeah, these people just didn't understand what was happening. They thought that people wanted to help them overthrow the Ayatollah's regime, but in reality, they just wanted to destroy the country. Well, now I think nobody in Iran has any illusions left. By the way, let's note that the claim that Iran wanted to eliminate Israel, which is the basis for this whole policy, like we carried out
A preemptive strike.
a preemptive strike. Russia also carried out a preemptive strike. And the information that Ukraine was preparing all sorts of trouble is much more substantial, because Iran has always said that Jews should have their own state in Palestine. Iran also said, we are fighting against the Zionist regime, meaning against the elite who are doing what they're doing. That's why, you see, everything is so symmetrical. For this reason, if Israel had the chance to look respectable, it would have kept pushing this rhetoric for a long time. But after the strike on Iran, I'm afraid that's going to be very difficult.
And today, the Shah's son spoke. I actually know that family pretty well, and he addressed the Iranian people, saying they need to stage a coup. So, as I understand it, he wants to return to the American government to put the Shah's family back in power in Iran. Is there any chance of that happening, or will the Iranian people never accept it again?
Well, you realize that after this speech, the whole nation now sees him as an Israeli agent? Yeah, exactly.
He used to speak out before, too.
When the Great Patriotic War began, all the Russian people in the West basically split into those who supported the USSR and those who supported the Germans. That's just how it was. Yeah. What can you do about it? There's nothing you can do about it, right? Even Rachmaninoff, for example, supported the Red Army.
So, if Iran actually blocks the Strait of Hormuz, what will happen? Will the West collapse, or will the entire collective West respond to Iran for this?
Well, you know, I don't think everything will just collapse like that. Mountains of corpses, rivers of blood, and so on. And so on. I think what will happen is this: oil prices will rise to 150, maybe 180. Well, maybe at first they'll go up to 120. For the US or China, that's not a tragedy because they have strategic oil reserves. But for the UK, and especially for the European Union, it will be extremely tough. That's it. And then this situation will persist. I think Trump will try to keep this situation going for as long as possible. First, because it's a blow to his enemies in London and the European Union, and second, because it will allow for quite a lot of money to be made for the development of the shale industry.
Look, Mish, Trump gave Iran 60 days to sign this agreement. On the very first day, Israel struck. But today, Trump announced on his Truth Social that America has nothing to do with Israel's attack on Iran. But if Iran hits any American target, then Trump will unleash the full force of the American military on them, and it will be, like, terrible. What do you think? Could Iran actually strike at American bases or not? Well, could this trouble affect you?
Well, you see, that's a complicated question because the United States has clearly shown that they're involved. Yeah, exactly. And, forgive me, but even Netanyahu basically said that the U.S. knew, the U.S. helped, he said that himself. Moreover, now he has asked for direct military assistance. He was denied direct military assistance, and I think he won't get it anymore. But, Steve, and this is very important, he didn't disavow. In other words, Trump didn't disavow Netanyahu's words that the United States knew and helped. The Arab world won't give any money, and the level of trust in the U.S. in the region has dropped significantly. And most importantly, you have to understand, when drone attacks start hitting American military bases in the region, how are you going to control who did it? It's impossible. Some kind of crap will fly in at you from Yemen, for example. And what are you going to do with her? That's how it is.
Well, they say that this happened. I heard that American and British Air Force planes were helping the Israelis repel attacks from drones and everything else. I don't know if that's true or not, but that's the rumor going around.
I can't say anything about that. I do know that all the drones that took off first were shot down. But, I don't even know whose drones those are. Maybe they were coming from Iraq, not Iran. Right now, Iran is mainly hitting Israel with missiles. But theoretically, I wouldn't rule out that they could use drones too, because I don't know what condition the Israeli.
Could a war with Iran become a point of no return, the start of World War III? Or will it all be limited to just theatrical rhetoric?
Well, it's not just theatrical rhetoric. There are a lot of people living there, and they're actually dying. Here. No, this isn't World War III. It's a reformatting of the Middle East. By the way, a very important thing, from the Eastern perspective, the response has to be symmetrical. I've already talked about this. Since Israel hit the Iranian reactor, Iran should bomb the reactor in the Negev Desert in Dimona.
According to these points?
Listen, you see, the thing is, we just don't know. They've already hit it. We don't know what's going on there. We'll find out. You can't hide something like that, but we'll find out in maybe 3 days, maybe a week.
All right, let's move on to Kyiv then. Because with all this going on, the war in Ukraine has kind of faded into the background since everyone is focused on Iran. Tell me, please, why hasn't Russia finished off Kyiv yet, if this is a matter of the state's survival, or is someone holding things back from the inside?
Well, of course, there are people slowing things down from the inside. The level of betrayal in Russia is, pretty comparable to the level of betrayal in Iran. If the deputy defense minister's children live over there, in the West, what are we even talking about? Some of them. That's why the situation in this regard is extremely tense, and it's absolutely obvious that the notorious Security Council meeting that took place last week, did you notice? It's just like the meeting between Powell and Trump in the White House. There's no information at all, not even about who is participating in it. Well, there was a phrase mentioned that they discussed values, but everyone understands that's nonsense.
Yeah, I just don't get.
If they really were discussing values, at least show who was involved in the discussion. You could draw all sorts of conclusions from that, but that's how it is.
I don't understand why Russia is playing at humanism when NATO mercenaries are fighting against it and people are dying every day. Where's the harsh response, anyway? Why so much humanism?
Well, exactly because Russia has always tried to negotiate. And they kept setting conditions for any agreement. Don't do this, don't do that, don't do this. For example, there was a strike on the oil refinery in Kramatorsk, which they supposedly targeted, but never really hit seriously, because it's claimed that the Kramatorsk oil refinery has co-owners from Russia, and they're pretty high-ranking. They say that only just now was it actually hit seriously. If that's true, maybe it means the situation in Russia is starting to change.
And why is Russia still trading with its enemies? Gas, oil, grain. So what is this, war or business as usual?
No, the thing is, the situation has changed. Russia exists within the global economy, and the problem is that it can't survive without it, because there is no self-sufficient economy like there was in the Soviet era. So, this is something absolutely necessary. That's why I think that now, as this global dollar system collapses, the picture will start to change. And so, well, we'll see what happens. Today has been a tough day. I gave a big lecture today. I also appeared on Yevstafiyev's final show today. So that's how it is.
We should have invited him over. And now, the last question for today. Please, tell me one last thing. What will happen to Europe if Russia fully invades Ukraine with force? How far will they go? How much further could Russia go?
Oh, I can't say that, because everything depends on how, accordingly, the situation will change, well, sort of, in the world as a whole. It's absolutely clear that what's happening with Iran has a huge impact on Russia. So, a lot will depend on how that plays out. Yeah, that's it. Yeah. So I think it's going to be really interesting from that perspective.
Okay, I got it. All right, let's see. We're about to post a repost there. Let's see what happens after 2 or 3 days of talks with Iran, how far this will go, and then we'll come back and discuss it all.
Yeah, but I just want to say that I discuss a lot of the situation in real time in the closed Telegram channel chat.
Yeah, I remember. Yeah.
Now you can subscribe to it even from abroad. And by the way, I want to mention that it's really important. Today is Sunday, and yesterday the latest review from the Khazin Foundation was released. Tomorrow at 10 in the morning Moscow time, it will be released in English, and I really recommend everyone read it because it explains what's going on. And I want to say, from a macroeconomic perspective, nothing is really happening, everything is proceeding as it was. And these processes are extremely significant and visible. The thing is, they just don't show them in standard analytical materials. That's how it is.
Can I ask you one more question? Look, if America completely pulls out of Ukraine, will everything collapse within a week or two, like it did in Afghanistan?
I think the Kyiv regime will collapse. But what happens next all depends on what decisions are made in Moscow. What should be done about this mess? But you also have to keep in mind that there's one problem, and it's this. Right now, you have the European Union and NATO. But will they still be around in a year or two? That's a very complicated question. So, if the European Union and NATO take responsibility for at least part of what used to be Ukraine, and then they themselves fall apart completely regardless of what's left, then all sorts of things could happen with those remnants as well.
Do you think globalism is already dying or not yet?
Well, this liberal globalism, the Western global project. Yes, of course, because the dollar is dying, the global dollar system is dying.
What will replace it? Fragmentation, regional currencies, or a digital dictatorship?
Bretton Woods. Well, a digital dictatorship isn't going to happen. Moreover, the attempt to replace the Federal Reserve with a digital system has failed. That's actually the main reason. We already discussed this. That's why Musk was making noise. Here. As for what will happen to the global economy, it will break up into currency zones. We actually wrote about this back in our 2003 book, The Dollar Empire's Rope and the End of the Epic.
Okay. Thank you very much. See you in a couple of days. Thanks, everyone. Goodbye.
No Pazarin.